This is the PitchVision Academy Cricket Show, Series 7, Episode 32, Spinners and Statistics. Coming up on this week's PitchVision Academy Cricket Show, we get in depth on a couple of topics. We talk about developing spinners. Are they a special case, or is it just a matter of good coaching? Find out what the team think there. And we also delve into statistics. What you need to do to have them as an effective way to coach and improve players without getting too reliant on the numbers and too focused on gathering that information. All that and more coming up on this week's PitchVision Academy Cricket Show. Welcome to the PitchVision Academy Cricket Show. Just to let you know what's going on, we are 3 cricket coaches who are here to help you out for the next half an hour or so. Whether it's coaching cricket or playing cricket, this is the place to be. My name's David Hinchliffe. I look after things here. And joining me on the ride, first of all, is the Director of Cricket Coaching at Millfield School. It's Mark Garaway. Hello, Gareth. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Just in the car, a little drive, going up north to drop off little Nipper, and then back to it tomorrow. Some training tomorrow at school, and then off to semi-final of the Under-17 Cup, and then on Friday, and then Sunday we've got the National Under-15 Finals Day down at Arundel. So a busy start to term.
Yeah, no messing about, is there? Straight into it.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a good thing as well. You don't want to be messing around. Secondly, it's the cricket professional at Portsmouth Grammar School. It's Sam Lavery. Hello, Lavers. Are you back on it yet?
Kind of. We've had a little bit of fitness working this week with some of the other sports, which has been good to be involved in. And we've got a couple of inset days and things coming up, so I'm not sure how much involvement I will have in them. I will try and make it minimal, but I'm sure I'll be involved in a few things that are going on. So starting to get busy again.
One of the things that I was reading about this week was coaching spinners, and particularly there was an interview on Cricket Info with Ashley Giles, who, of course, was a very fine spinner in his own right, and now is coaching. And they were talking about how spinners, it's very difficult for spinners, both developing spinners as a coach and also for spinners to do the job. It's a time when spin is a little bit less, especially in the longer formats, than it used to be years ago. And so I was wondering how you approach this idea of developing spinners. Do spinners have kind of a special, unique case that they need to be treated differently in some way, or is it just a matter of making sure that the coaching of the basics is as good as it is in any other discipline?
Well, I think the basics are absolutely vital, and it was great to see Ash talking about those basics and keeping it really simple. One of his assets as a coach and as a player, actually, having worked with him and actually played with him, because he was a seamer back in the days where I played with him in the England setups. But the basics very much came through in what he was talking about, and obviously those basics start with the base itself, the delivery stride and everything that leads into that. And so he talks about that a lot, and ultimately our job, I suppose, further down the player development chain is to ensure that when a player does really well and he ends up in front of coaches such as Ashley at county level, that they have those basics in place. And if they've got those basics in place, then they've got half a chance of having a repeatable action. And that's another thing that really came out in Ash's conversation and interview that was behind this article.
How do you approach coaching spinners, Lavis?
Well, have a sort of a bit of a framework or a set of guidelines that we'll often work towards. General ideas that usually fit a framework for a spinner. So a few key points on alignment and body position and angles and things like that, but generally working towards something rather than working away from those principles. And by that, what I mean is what we're trying to do is get the ball spinning in a certain direction and get the ball being delivered at a certain pace, and there are things that are going to help that and make that more likely to happen, or the sort of history would suggest there are a few things you can do technically that are more likely to make that happen. But there will be individual cases, and there'll be people who've got their own way of finding a path to getting that ball doing what they want it to do. So we've got some basics in place that we'll try and achieve, which are fairly generic, but always being aware that there could be that individual who'll do things their own way and still achieve the outcomes and get the result that you're looking for.
Do you think it's more difficult to be a spinner now than it used to be, or do you think it's just that the role is different rather than more or less difficult?
It's different, definitely different, but I think in our own country we've been dreadful at developing spin bowlers over the years, and it's been fantastic this year to see a number of spin bowlers come through. I think one of the reasons for that in county cricket in particular has been the way that the pitches have adjusted and changed as a result of the regulation on tosses. So we've seen more pitches spinning, and as I mentioned in an article that I wrote last week, down at Somerset, I've watched a number of games this year that have been played on very dry wickets, which are spun pretty much from day one, which is a very different state of affairs for spin bowlers to bowl on from what was usually the case at Taunton and everywhere else around the country. So the regulation that England have put in has really helped to give spinners more overs, and I know that there's a batch of stats that are going to come out at the end of the county season which will back that up, which is really good. So that's helping. Definitely from this year onwards that is helping, but also one day cricket I think is also helping spin, particularly 50 over cricket now, and again Ashley alluded to this in the article that he had, where good spin bowlers are being rewarded more in 50 over cricket now. People are attacking much more, aren't they, with the bats, and we're seeing bigger scores, but we're also seeing spin come into play a heck of a lot more. The game that we watched the other night between Pakistan and England, where England racked up that huge total, it was evident that yes, England have got pace, but they've also got two spinners who are developing into reasonable bowlers in ODI cricket, in Rashid and Moeen Ali, and they're coming into the game a lot more in that 50 over as well. And as Ash said, the game of 2020 cricket is often the spinners that don't bowl the ball consistently, that don't necessarily land it perfectly all the time, are the ones that get delivered, get rewarded by the shorter format of the game. So certainly in the top two levels of a game, Test cricket and ODI, the two longest forms, I think good spin bowlers are getting rewarded now a lot more than they were, and that's exciting for me, having only seen a couple of world-class spinners come through the England setup in the last 10 or 12 years.
It's an issue that so the issue of conditions is something that Australia have talked about suffering from in the last couple of years, where obviously in England we've had quite a big change with the rules, which has had quite an apparent impact straight away, and you can see that happening, as Gareth has talked about there. And Australian pitches have kind of gone the other way, where they all used to have their own unique character and their own characteristics that would effectively be bounce or pace or spin or whatever it might be. And if you were to name a pitch in Australia, most people who've been out there or watched it on TV would be able to have a pretty good indication or pretty good bit of insight as to what the pitches would play like, and whether it be the Wacker or the SCG or whatever it might be. And because of that, people who grew up playing first class cricket out there in the Shield competition would have to experience and adapt and learn to bowling and playing in different scenarios, in different match conditions, etc., because the pitches were so varied. And Darren Lehman's recently called for them to go back to their roots and try and go back to being what they were, so that these players who are coming through the state system are able to experience things, are able to experience a day 4 SCG pitch or a lively pitch at the Wacker or whatever it might be. So I think the conditions and the environment that you create are maybe not above all, but are such a massive factor into the success you have, or the challenges and the competitive scenarios you can create, and that's going to have a big knock-on effect as to how successful people are as they move up to that level and then beyond that level.
Okay, let's wrap up this section with the yes-no round. 3 questions that can only be answered yes or no, no matter how much more the team want to say. I've got the questions, so let's fire away. First question. All batsmen should be able to sweep or use their feet to spin.
Yes.
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 Second question. Every bowler needs a good variation.
Yes.
Yes.
Third question. If you want something enough and commit to it sufficiently, good things will happen.
Yes.
Yes.
It's time now to dip into the mailbag, pick out a couple of questions that have been sent in by listeners to the show or readers to the PitchVision Academy website. And it's pretty simple. We do our best to answer those questions, and then we pick the best question of the week, and that wins a prize, which is an online coaching course from PitchVision Academy at pitchvision.com. You can send your questions into us by emailing coach@pitchvision.com, and we'll tell you about other ways to get in touch with us towards the end of the show. But Padmesh is the first person to have got in touch with us. What could be the mindset of a batsman while having a trial for a 2020 league? Which shots should I play and which shouldn't I play?
Well, I think in basic terms, your best shots you should play more often than your not best shots. And whilst that sounds incredibly basic and stupid almost, it's pretty much what the best players do, is that they understand their own game before they understand what anybody else is trying to do. And often the best players that move from level to level, so maybe from club cricket to a representative level, or maybe first class cricket into international cricket, the best players are ones that take their own game into that environment, rather than trying to do things that other people that they've seen on telly or other people that they've watched playing are achieving. So know your own game. You will have, I'm sure, a couple of boundary options which are your signature boundary options. Stick with those, identify which balls you can play those shots to, and stick with those, and then do whatever your single options are. The reason why you're going into that trial is because you've been deemed good enough to get to that trial level, and then it's about putting your game down on that trial, would be my first bit of advice for you, rather than saying that in order to be a 2020 player you've got to be able to ramp, or you've got to be able to do this, or you've got to be able to do that. It's got to fit in with your own game. And it's been interesting to hear Owen Morgan talk about how to chase down huge totals, for example. I've written an article on it this week, but how to chase down huge totals, he said, is all about you doing what you are good at. And I don't think that changes irrespective of the length of the time of the game. If you're good enough to play at that level, then you deliver your own game. So that would be my advice to you.
I guess it's common to think if it's a trial, I need to impress, so I need to do things that are that show me as the best I can possibly be. So I've got to do all kinds of brilliant things. But actually, the most brilliant thing you can do is be brilliant at the things that you are brilliant at. If you see what I mean, Lavers.
Yeah, I mean, you could go into it with a mindset that I want to dazzle them with 15 different shots, but would you rather play 15 different shots and maybe play 5 of them well, 5 of them poorly, and 5 of them somewhere in between, or would you actually rather go in with 4 or 5 really dependable things that you know you can count on, that you're going to hit 9 times out of 10? Ultimately, yes, it's nice to be able to hit all the way around the park, but if you can hit the ball for 4 and you can hit the ball for 6 and you can rotate the strike, you don't realistically need to be able to do it in every direction all the time. I think if you can go in and play your strong shots and play to your strong suit, it probably gives off the aura of someone who's in control of their game and they understand how they're going to play. And not only does that impress from the point of view that it's showing you've got skill and you've got understanding how you're going to play, but it also gives a pretty solid foundation of someone for something that can be built upon as well. If you've got 10 shots that are all a little bit sporadic, a bit inconsistent, and you're trying them because you want to show what you could potentially do, then you're kind of leaving that trial with the coach thinking, well, he played those 10 shots okay, but all 10 shots need a bit of work. Whereas if you go out and play 3 or 4 things brilliantly, and they know their bankers in terms of going for runs, yet they think, all right, well, let's just add one or two things. Then you've only got a couple of things they want to add into your game to learn. So stick to your strengths, stick to things you know. Do the right things away from the cricket environment as well. So speak well about your game, prepare well, present well. Simple things that don't necessarily come into how you hit the ball, but again are important for a coach to gauge how they're going to work with you, how they're going to talk to you, how they're going to make you better, and also how you're going to fit into a team environment, which is so important these days.
I guess making a good impression when you're doing a trial is very important as well, because there's no way you can show your entire self in a trial situation, because it's one game. Even if you do really well, if you score 100 or whatever it is, you still are not going to be able to show everything about who you are and the way that you play. So making a really good first impression by doing those little things well really helps with if you're a borderline case and someone is saying, well, is he going to be there? Isn't he going to be there? I'm not sure. Maybe we'll give him a bit more leeway because he's obviously a character who can take the pressure, or who is prepared to help others, or do one of those other things that aren't necessarily about scoring runs.
Yeah, it's a snapshot, isn't it? Trials are snapshots. That's all they are. And let's be frank, they're not the best way to select a cricket team, but they're part of a good selection process. You do need to have a trial at some point, but they're a part of the good selection process. But in some places, they are everything, aren't they? I mean, we all know of those. And it's about a little snapshot. It's about showing bits of yourself. But all I would say is always be authentic to yourself in that, because these guys, these coaches or managers that select these sides based off trials have got a lot of experience of doing that and working within the system. So if you turn up and try to be something that you're not, either with the shots that you play, the deliveries that you bowl, or the way that you go about some of those things that Sam talked about, handling pressure or helping people out or being a good teammate, if any of that is woolly and false, then it will be quite transparent, very quickly sought out, and it will leave a bit of a negative, I suppose, placed over your head. So going back to the shots, play your own shots, be your own person, do what you do that has got you to that point in time, and you give yourself the best chance of success.
Okay, so this week we've got a question that has come in from Tony, and it's actually aimed at David, so I'm going to introduce it. So he says, David, this is in relation to an article that you've recently written, so thanks for sharing your findings. It's really good to see some actual numbers attached to the measures to show what good actually looks like. Although I appreciate this may vary from league to league, it's important to identify factors, measuring them, and hopefully making positive changes to training, games, etc., and hopefully having an impact on those factors. So Tony's got a few follow-up questions here, and if you want to have a look at David's original article, you can do, and the details will be in the show notes. Question 1 though, David. Yep. Did you have a dedicated analyst to record the fielding information in particular? Obviously the batting and the bowling stats can often be picked up from the scorer, but did you have anyone who's dedicated specifically to picking up that fielding data?
Yeah, so, well, just to give a slight overview for anyone who hasn't read the article, I do encourage you to read it, just to maybe even just skim it over, just to have a look at the type of thing that we're talking about here. But basically it's down to putting some stats on the season that we've just had at West of Scotland and what that meant in terms of winning games, and how we went about looking at the statistics in new ways rather than just having averages and all the rest of it, which we've talked about before. And so, yeah, to that first question, we did have a dedicated analyst. That dedicated analyst was me. And there's always some grey area when it comes to judging whether something is a misfield or a good piece of fielding, isn't there? Because how do you distinguish between what is a good stop that saved runs and a stop that you would expect people to make all the time? So there's always going to be some grey areas there, and that's why it's important to have someone who not only knows cricket, but can also be consistent throughout the year on what they consider to be a good stop and what they consider to be a misfield. And I had a number of sort of little rules to myself of saying, it's a misfield if it hits the fielder. It's not a misfield if the fielder fumbles it, but they don't get an extra run because it didn't cost anything. but it is a misfield if you let it straight through your legs. Obviously, and they run two or whatever. So that's how I did that. And yes, it's not a perfect science; it never will be. But at least you can apply some logic to it that way.
Well, I'm very much like you, that it has to be one person, and that person, a bit like yourself, is me in our team context. So, I hold pretty high standards on fielding, as many will know. So I'm quite harsh on it, but harsh in matches to then drive our practice going forward. So, if somebody dives and parries it, I will take into context whether there's anybody behind them, whether it was going for four, whether it was a good dive or not a good dive. But generally, I'm pretty harsh in practice, as I say, and then that will fuel our development going forward in the game. So if we find that there is a glaring gap in our stats around fumbles or direct hits or the amount of throws to our hitting of the stumps, for example, then we can then tailor our training over the next few days and weeks to try and make that gap up or even improve it. And that really goes back to my days at Ireland as much as anything, where we went from being the worst throwing side in terms of accuracy and power at the 2010 T20 World Competition out in the West Indies to being the most accurate throwing team in the 2011 World Cup, where we hit the stumps. I think we got 12 direct hit runouts over the course of the tournament, which was amazing. So that's the way that I try and drive it. But I am a pretty tough cookie when it comes to marking.
What about you, Lavis? I don't even know if you do it to that level. Do you mark misfields and things like that?
Yeah, we try and keep a track record of where people, if people are making a misfield, the area in which they're misfielding. So, what type of fielding was it? Obviously, as you said, it could be an absolute stinker straight through the legs. That's something which really shouldn't be happening, or could be something that falls into another category, diving left, diving right, movement based, etc. So I actually have a little bit of a grid which I'll use as often as I can to try and track things, so that we're aware of the mistakes that are being made. We know what they are. So rather than just saying that's a tick, that's a fielding error, we can apportion it to a specific skill, which could be getting down low or movement, or it could be taking a catch, or it could be any number of things. So that's the kind of way I go. I think as long as you have that element of continuity and consistency in the standards you hold in your review, it means that the information and how others judge that information can be interpreted quite easily. If you change your personnel, or if you change your personality from day to day, and sometimes you're a bit more lenient and sometimes you're a bit tougher, then the numbers that come out of it become a little bit cloudy, don't they? So I think as long as you have that element of consistency, and as long as people know what is and what isn't a misfield, then the information can be really, really useful. So obviously it's another job on the list for you as coach, David. But what's 50 jobs when you've already got 49?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from that one, which was a good start, or a good opening question from Tony, I thought. He said, did you or the team agree on the information to collate at the start of the season? So kind of following on from what I was talking about there, did you have a group discussion about it and come up with kind of a framework for how you were going to collate this information?
We did, but it was very vague. One of the problems that I felt we had in the first season was that you would say, well, we didn't feel very well in that game, and you've got no way of knowing the truth. People get a general sense of fielding badly or well from key moments rather than someone actually measuring it. So I said to the guys that this year I'm going to measure it and we will see what we can see. So there weren't any specific target set, which kind of moves on to the next question, I suppose. But there wasn't anything specific set. We more said, look, let's start measuring these things, and then we'll be able to move forward, rather than just saying generally, well, we didn't feel very well today, and we can't be any more specific than that.
Okay, so I think we can move into the next question really there, because the next bit talks about did you have any specific targets set? And I think that works hand in hand with what you've just said, as you've made a progression, haven't you, from year 1 to year 2, in terms of you've identified a problem in year 1 and you've put something in place for year 2. How could that, or how has that used any targets, or how might that develop into a structure that has some targets or changes into year 3?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one I've not really thought through yet. I guess when you're looking at numbers, just raw numbers like that, and saying, okay, this is what we found out this year, then next year you can say, okay, what do we need to do to improve on these things? So misfields is a really good example. We measured misfields as a general thing of, if you do a misfield, that counts as 1. It doesn't matter how many runs it costs, whether it's 4 or 1, doesn't make any difference. And the average number of misfields during a game for us dropped from 7 down to 5 during the year. So that shows an improvement, and it showed what we were working on was making a difference. But on the other hand, the catch percentage, which was at its lowest was at 52, and its highest was at 61. It didn't really move much around from that, no matter how much extra catching practice we did. So I guess that means how can we move forward and make that number better without discouraging people not going for difficult catches and all that kind of thing. So that's something I need to think about a little bit more.
I guess you need to consider the way that the information's relayed back to the team, don't you? And I think it's quite easy as a player to get consumed with that percentage figure, whereas you need to have the overriding factor needs to be the top figure, which is the number of catches. And if you take 75% of your catches and you only went for 10, but as you said, people realistically could have gone for a few more, but they have that other figure in the back of their mind, so they end up taking a really high percentage but of a lower number, then it's not really worth it. So the top figure of how many catches did we take is the all important thing. Now, relating that to from game to game is very tough, because you're going to create more chances in some games than others. But across a season, I think you'd probably be thinking about creating that number and looking at that one. The percentage is then going to go into that, and I guess it becomes more of a task and slightly trickier ground to then start interpreting the value based on a catch in terms of its difficulty level. And that would probably be more ideal in terms of analysing the success or failure of what's happened, and maybe catches could be graded as a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, or drops could be done the same way, whichever way you want to do it. But yeah, there are a lot of things to think about, and there are lots of different ways you can analyse it, but all the time you're doing it, you're trying to make sure that you're keeping a level of simplicity so that you can actually do it without losing out on the other things you're trying to do on the day. And also, when you feed it back to the players, also it's done with a level of simplicity as well. So it takes sometimes a bit of complicated thinking to come up with something that can be presented quite simply, and sometimes it's a very simple idea that can be presented quite simply. So not an easy thing to do, but lots of ideas there.
Going back to your experience, David, so the catching percentage from year to year didn't move particularly, is that right? Or from game to game didn't move hugely?
Some games were better than others, but generally the average stayed around about close to sort of 55-60%, that kind of number.
Yeah. So to me, and you've done loads of practice, I know you've done heaps of practice on your catching. So if we say to ourselves that actually all of that catching practice that we're doing is maintaining rather than heightening our effectiveness as a catching group, there are other areas that we can then explore within our fielding and our catching, which may help. So it could be deployment. It could be, are there different positions that you can put these catchers that are doing lots of practice in, which will help them to take more catches. So some players, for example, will like the ball coming to them straight down the ground. Other people will be happier with the ball coming to them from square of the wicket. Can we analyse in that way? Because if everybody's catching is staying pretty much the same irrespective of practice, can we reposition and redeploy them and see if that has any effect on the way that the stats look? Being a good catcher is great, and that's a sort of prerequisite really, and that comes through practice. But if these stats are telling us, irrespective of how much practice we put in, we're still not improving on a match to match, then there could be other ways of skinning a cat and working out who likes the ball square, who's good at slip, who likes the ball coming straight on at them. Those sorts of things might help. It might be that certain people are off balance when they're walking in, or they're not walking in enough, or whatever the case may be, that could help make that difference between a 61% catch percentage and getting up to those levels of 75 without necessarily doing that much practice.
Okay, so from there, he's then moved into the next idea of how is that actually used and fed back in the season. So is that something that you then use to either feed back to players or use to plan your sessions week to week as the season's going on, or is it something that you hold right back to the end of the year?
I don't feed it back to the players directly unless they specifically ask. Occasionally I'll feed a little stat in it now and again, but generally speaking, I use it more, the actual numbers themselves, as a way of planning what we're going to do at training and saying, okay, well look, we didn't feel particularly well in this game, and a lot of it was ground fielding. Right, catching seemed to be okay, but the ground fielding was worse than where we wanted it to be. So let's make sure that we work on the ground fielding this week, especially in the key areas where the highest traffic is. So that's a good example of how that works as well, because the numbers improved over the year. So to me, that showed certainly a correlation between doing more ground fielding work and the ground fielding improving. But then the key thing for me was trying not to overload the guys with too much information, because some guys love it, but a lot of other guys completely turn off to it and say, look, I don't care what the numbers are. I just want to come to practice. I just want to play my game, and I don't really care what my scoring ball percentage was, or what my misfield number was, or what my rate per over was. It's just I'm going to try as hard as I can to do the best job I can on the day, and that's that. And so if those guys, there's no point in talking to them about numbers. So, but in the background with my planning, that's where it comes in.
Gareth, what about you? Do you keep stuff in season, or do you feed back to players, or is it something that you largely keep to yourself and have an awareness of, and maybe it just impacts a little bit on the time you attribute to different parts of training sessions?
Yeah, I'm with David on it, but occasionally, so I'd not hold stuff back, but that information's for me, which is then going to inform my practice, which will obviously, hopefully, have a positive effect on the players. But occasionally, I will drop stuff in, and that will be, I suppose, more of a motivational thing. And I'll give you an example of it. We missed the stumps a lot with throws in one game last year. We actually won the game at a canter, but we missed the stumps a lot. And it could have been an even easier win if we'd have hit one or two of our seemingly endless amount of throws at a set stump. So I set the boys a challenge one lunchtime. I fed in our percentage, and I said, there's a bunch of kit. If you want to come out tomorrow, then you're going to do some stump hits. You know the drills. If you want to create your own drills, go for it and see what it is. And myself and Dan sat in the office and basically watched this group of kids go out there, set up some brilliant drills, better than some of the ones that we do, I'll be brutally honest, and went about their business brilliantly. Now, the impact of that was that we actually ended up throwing less, but when we threw less in the games, we hit the stumps on a more regular basis. I think our percentage went up by 8, which sounds like quite a small increment of improvement, but off the back of one session where neither coach was involved, that was pretty amazing. So I hold it to myself unless I can drop in a bit of information that will motivate and motivate people to get better on their own, because I think if there's one element of cricket that we can get better at on our own, then fielding is probably that area.
Absolutely. So having talked about all of that now, and having probably considered a few different ideas from Gareth and a couple from myself, how do you are you at that planning phase for next year now, David? Are you thinking about how it can be tweaked or it can be upgraded or how it might develop, or are you gonna repeat and go in with what you've got in previously and stick to what you've got and hope that continues to add some value?
I definitely want to make some changes. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Ideally, I'd track every single thing that could possibly have happened in as granular detail as possible. But I don't think that's going to be possible. So I need to decide what things I'm going to find important next year based on what happened this year and what I felt was, if only I had known that information, I could have done more to fight, to help with things. So I need to decide what that is. I'm definitely going to add some things. I might get more specific to individuals next year rather than keeping it as general stats. Might do it more towards individuals, but I'm not quite sure how I'll do that yet. But there's definitely going to be some development of one kind or another without getting too complicated.
I guess if you just think about the way you actually record the data, is there a way that's done on a spreadsheet, on a piece of paper, on an iPad? Is there a way that can not really change your workload, but can upgrade the quality or the detail of information?
Yeah.
And obviously it depends on the method you're using at the moment and how easy or difficult that is, and then how a little bit of adapting that can upgrade what you're coming out with on the other side.
Well, we've done that for a couple of years, and I think it's great looking to always update. But ultimately, our interventions going back to our players, you want to make that as simple and logical and straightforward a process as possible. And the challenge with updating, I suppose, is that we're always adding stuff. So it's about that end result. And with the time that generally coaches have with their players, unless you're at a professional level, you're not going to spend enough time with people to make massive amounts of interactions around something such as fielding and the detail around that. So we're holding fort, and there's two bits to that. We're actually starting a performance analysis A-level, and part of that is going to be a project which is going to be given to the A-level group to develop a system which can easily put down loads of information on fielding, for example, and then bring it back to a very simplistic feedback sheet to players and coaches alike. So I think that will probably take 2 years to develop, and I'm quite comfortable with keeping with what we've got going for 2 years and then doing a few little tests on the new system to get it right. But sometimes, whilst innovation is great, what you don't want to do is to add an extra level of complexity which is not needed. So we're staying as we are for the next couple of years until the A-level crew have come up with something which is equally as simple but actually can record a lot more information in a very efficient fashion for whoever that may be the inputter.
And especially if there's one person gathering the data, what you don't want to be doing is being outside of the moment, because you're so focused on capturing all that information that you lose focus on what's happening, if you see what I mean. You're so busy typing things in that you're not speaking to people anymore.
Absolutely. You've got to still be able to prioritise the roles you have on the day and how significant they are, and even if one of the roles is being aware of what's going on. I remember I've had days where, for whatever reason, we've not had anyone be able to score or something, so I've ended up scoring and trying to run some stats on the side, and you kind of get to 25, 30 overs into the game and you're not really sure what's happened, and you've got this information in front of you which gives you the figures, but you don't actually know a lot about the game because you're so absorbed in recording things and having your head in the book, and it does get quite difficult. So retaining a sense of perspective as to what the important things are, and what's actually going to be the real valuable feedback to the players is key. And sometimes the stats are great and they can be very, very useful, and they can have a lot of impact on team or individuals, but sometimes you need that qualitative feedback a little bit more. And for that, it does need an awareness of what is going on in the game and being able to just kind of digest the game as it unfolds.
And that is all we've got time for on the show this week. Before we go, what we normally do is decide on a winner of the question this week, but we spent so much time on one question. I don't know if it's fair to pin it down to which one did you prefer this week, Gareth. What do you reckon? Is there a case for just giving the question to Padmesh just by the fact that we glossed over his question so quickly in order to give the long answer in the other one?
Yeah, I think there probably is actually, but I think it was a great question around trialling, in which so many of our listeners are going to experience, aren't they? You only look at the types of questions that we come in, the feedback that we get, and you realise that so many players, particularly in the subcontinent, are going through a trial system, and some clarity that we can give around that, which hopefully we have, will help everybody. So yeah, I agree with you.
Well, congratulations, Padmesh, and thanks very much, Tony, as well, for some interesting questions there. And me getting to talk about myself is always a good thing. Now, Gareth, if someone was listening to the show and they wanted to send in their question, they wanted to have their chance to win the online coaching course, how could they get in touch with us?
They could give us a call on 0203 239 7543 or drop us an email on coach@pitchvision.com.
That's right, the social media is also an option. You can find us on Facebook by going to facebook.com/pitchvisionacademy or Twitter by going to @pitchvisionacad. You can download the show every week as well if you want to listen to it regularly. It's free, it comes out on Fridays. And you can do that by going to your favourite podcast app and doing a search for PitchVision Academy, tapping the subscribe button, and you're away. And if you want to get the show notes or join in the fun on the main website, you can point your browser at pitchvision.com/academy. Click on the podcast link and you'll get a way to stream it on there or download the show notes, download the show directly, whatever you want to do there. That's all for this week. We hope you listen next week, but until then, have a good week. Cheers, Gareth. Cheers, Lavers.
Cheers, fellas.
Cheers, guys.